The other night, I was catching up with a friend I hadn't seen in years. We were talking about a mutual acquaintance who had recently done something pretty inexcusable to him. I was ready to join him in the venting session, to be the hype man for his anger. But as I started laying out all the reasons why he should be furious, he just watched me with this calm, almost detached expression. He wasn't nodding in agreement, he was just observing. "Aren't you going to do anything?" I asked. "Aren't you going to demand an explanation?" He took a slow breath and said something that stopped me cold. "I don't need an explanation anymore. I finally just understood." It was a bizarre moment. Usually when someone hurts us, we want a trial. We want evidence, an apology, a public admission of guilt. But he sat there without a single piece of data to prove his point. He didn't have a long list of why or how. Instead, he just seemed to have this internal clarity, a sense that the other person's behavior was a reflection of their own unresolved battles, not his worth. To him, the lack of an apology was the answer itself. But then the conversation took a turn. Someone else joined us and started praising him for being so forgiving and soft-hearted. Immediately, his expression shifted. He wasn't happy about the compliment. In fact, he looked almost frustrated. He corrected them sharply. "I'm not being soft, and I haven't forgiven them because they deserve it. I've just stopped letting their chaos be my problem." That instantaneous correction, refusing to be labeled as nice when he was actually being protective, was a revelation. It made me realize that what we often call moving on isn't a passive act of kindness. It's a calculated, sometimes painful transition into maturity. It's that quiet, almost invisible threshold where you stop asking, "Why me?" and start realizing that your silence isn't a weakness, it's your balance.
Wow. That distinction right there at the end, I'm not being soft, I'm being protective.
It hit me like a ton of bricks.
Because we do that all the time. We see someone not reacting, not, blowing up, and we immediately label it as weakness, as passivity.
Or forgiveness, like he was some kind of saint. And he was not having it.
He was not having it because what he was doing was actually, in a strange way, a deeply aggressive act. He was building a wall. He was saying, your chaos stops here. It does not enter my system.
That's it. It felt heavy. It was a militant kind of peace, not a gentle one.
And that's really what we're going to get into today, that heaviness. Because what your friend was doing and what our sources suggest is that this kind of emotional restraint isn't just a psychological trick. It's a high-status evolutionary signal. It's a survival mechanism.
Right. And we've got a really interesting stack of sources for this deep dive. We're looking at evolutionary psychology, workplace dynamics, even sexual marketplace theory.
A really diverse stack, but there's a thread that runs through all of it. This idea that in a world that is constantly trying to drain you, to provoke a reaction, silence, strategic silence, is about conserving your most valuable resource, your own energy.
We're going to look at this through three different lenses.
Yeah.
We're starting with the professional world, the high-pressure workplace, which feels like the perfect place to start.
Absolutely, because that's where the pressure to perform, to react is just dialed up to 11.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got this first story, a narrative about an architect named Elias. I'm just going to read this out because the details are so specific and they really frame the whole discussion.
Go for it.
Okay, so I heard a story recently about a man named Elias, a lead architect in a high-pressure firm in London. During a critical project failure where millions were at stake, the boardroom became a theater of blame. While younger associates scrambled to deflect and senior partners vented their frustrations with visible tremors in their voices, Elias sat in what many described as a deafening silence. He didn't offer an excuse or a defensive retort. Later, I saw a commentary on this online, framing his restraint not as a lack of passion, but as the strategic application of stoicism. In the evolutionary hierarchy of the modern workplace, the man who does not leak emotion becomes the anchor. Elias understood that his anger would only add noise to a system already failing. He chose to be the quiet professional, absorbing the heat without reflecting it.
Absorbing the heat without reflecting it. That line, that is such a powerful image.
It is, but let me ask you the obvious question, because my first thought is this is incredibly risky. If you're in a boardroom and everyone is pointing fingers and you're the one who says nothing, don't you just become the target, the scapegoat?
You'd think so. I mean, common sense says defend yourself, right?
Right. Speak up or they'll pin it on you. So why did it work for Elias? Why did his silence read as strength and not guilt?
Okay, so to get at that, we have to look at something called the Leader Index. This comes out of research in the Leadership Quarterly, and it's a fascinating idea. The basic premise is that we, as social animals, have these deeply ingrained followership mechanisms.
So it's like a subconscious program running in the background.
Exactly. It's an algorithm.
Yeah.
And it's constantly scanning the room, asking one question: who should I follow right now? The key is that the answer changes depending on the environment.
What do you mean?
Well, if everything's calm, if the project is going well, we might follow the person who's charismatic, friendly, makes us laugh. But the moment a crisis hits, like millions of dollars going down the drain in that boardroom, the environment acts as a contextual trigger.
The algorithm changes its search parameters.
It completely reboots. It stops searching for friendly and starts an emergency scan for capable, for stable. And what do the senior partners signal when they're yelling, when their voices are trembling?
Panic. Chaos. I'm not in control.
They are leaking their internal state. They are broadcasting weakness. They're essentially screaming, I am overwhelmed by this threat. I cannot handle it.
And in that environment of noise and panic, Elias's silence becomes what? The only thing that makes sense.
It becomes a signal. But here's where we have to get really specific, because you brought up a great point earlier. How do we know he's a stoic leader and not just a guy who is frozen with terror?
Yeah, I could be terrified into silence. That doesn't make me a leader.
And this is where we bring in a core concept from evolutionary biology: costly signaling theory.
Okay, break that down.
The theory states that for a signal to be honest, for it to be believable proof of some underlying quality, it has to be expensive to produce. It has to cost the signaler something that a weaker individual couldn't afford.
Like the classic peacock's tail example.
Exactly like the peacock's tail. That tail is a massive burden. It's heavy, it makes it hard to fly. It's basically a giant eat me sign for predators. And it takes a huge amount of metabolic energy to grow.
So a sick or weak peacock literally can't fake a big, beautiful tail.
It would die trying. So when a peahen sees that magnificent tail, it's an unfakeable, honest signal that this male is genetically superior. He has so much energy and health that he can afford to waste it on this ridiculous, beautiful handicap.
Okay, so let's map that onto Elias in the boardroom. What is the cost he's paying by being silent?
The cost is immense. It's metabolic and it's cognitive. When you are in a high-threat situation like that, your career on the line, people screaming at you, your autonomic nervous system goes into overdrive.
The fight or flight response.
Full-blown fight or flight. Your amygdala is firing. It's flooding your system with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate is spiking. Your blood pressure is going up. Every cell in your body is screaming at you to do one of two things: yell back or run out of the room.
So the natural, biologically cheap response is to react, to leak that emotion.
Correct. That's what the partners are doing. It's easy. It's reflexive. To sit there perfectly still, heart rate under control, breathing slow. That requires you to use your prefrontal cortex, the most modern part of your brain, to actively suppress that primal, ancient panic response from your limbic system.
You're literally fighting your own biology.
You're in a cage match with your own biology. And that fight consumes a massive amount of cognitive resources. It is physically exhausting to remain that calm under that much pressure.
So the silence is the peacock's tail. He is broadcasting to everyone in that room without saying a word. I have so much internal capacity, so much surplus energy, that I can effortlessly contain a panic response that is currently crushing all of you.
Precisely. It is an honest, unfakeable signal of immense capability. The group doesn't consciously think through all of this, but they feel it. Their subconscious followership mechanism sees this signal and says, that's the guy. In this chaos, he is the point of stability. Follow him.
And that's how he avoids becoming the scapegoat. He elevates his status above the conflict itself.
He reframes the entire game. It's no longer about who to blame. It's about who can fix it. And he's the only one signaling that he can.
You know, the research also mentions a distinction between two paths to social status: dominance and prestige. I think most people, myself included, would probably lump those together.
They sound similar, but evolutionarily, they are completely different strategies.
Dominance is what? The biggest guy in the room.
Dominance is the chimp way. It's coercion. It's fear. It's do what I say or I will physically harm you. It's status taken through force. That's what the senior partners are attempting with their yelling. They're trying to intimidate the room into submission.
But it's a brittle kind of power.
Very. It works, but it creates resentment. People comply, but they don't follow. Prestige is the opposite. Prestige is status that is freely given by the group.
So you don't take it, you earn it.
You earn it by demonstrating skill and competence. We grant prestige to people we want to learn from, people we admire, people we want to emulate. Elias isn't using dominance. He isn't threatening anyone. He's using prestige. His skill, his emotional regulation is so impressive that the group willingly grants him leadership status.
It's what the source calls a team sport. Status isn't just about you. It's about how the team perceives you.
It is entirely about the audience. His silence would mean nothing in an empty room. It's powerful because the younger associates, and probably even the partners on some level, recognize it as the stabilizing force they desperately need.
Okay, I'm sold on the strategic value, but I have to push back on this because it sounds heroic, but also incredibly unhealthy. I mean, just because it's a good career move doesn't mean it's good for the man himself.
And that's the perfect pivot. Because you are absolutely right, there is a huge cost.
We have this other study here. Men are stoic, or are they? And it paints a much darker picture of what's going on under the surface.
It's a critical piece of the puzzle because it shows the double-edged nature of this strategy. The study found a really interesting generational split.
Between younger men and middle-aged men.
Right. It found that young men, say in their early 20s, often adopt a stoic, silent persona, but they're doing it out of fear. They're absolutely terrified of being judged, of looking weak or foolish if they show any emotional vulnerability.
So for them, silence isn't a power move. It's a shield. It's hiding.
It's a defensive crouch. It's not the costly signal of a high-status man with resources to spare. It's the energy conservation of a low-status man who is afraid of getting hurt.
But what about the older guys? The ones like Elias?
The study found that middle-aged men tended to be more pragmatic about it. They used silence as a tool, a way to navigate life's responsibilities without creating more drama. But, and this is the key, the psychological mechanism they use to achieve this is called expressive suppression.
Which sounds like a very clinical way of saying bottling it all up.
That's essentially what it is. It's the technical term for when you feel the emotion fully, the anger, the fear, the anxiety is all there, but you actively block the outward expression of it. You force your face to be a mask.
So on the outside, you look like Elias. Calm. Collected. But what's happening on the inside?
Internally, you're a pressure cooker. The research shows that men engaged in expressive suppression often have a more intense physiological reaction than people who just let it out. Your sympathetic nervous system is firing even harder. Your blood pressure spikes higher and stays high for longer.
So the senior partners who are yelling are actually, in a way, releasing that pressure while Elias is just containing it.
Exactly, which is fine once or twice. But if that's your strategy for dealing with stress every single day for 30 years...
Burnout, heart attacks.
All the classic outcomes, cardiovascular disease, chronic stress, psychological detachment, and it creates a terrible social catch-22, what the source calls the double bind.
And double bind being, be damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Precisely. Men in our culture are punished for expressing soft emotions like sadness. If Elias had broken down and cried in that meeting, what would have happened to his status?
It would have evaporated. He'd be seen as incompetent, unable to handle the pressure.
He'd be finished. But if he suppresses that emotion to maintain his status, he damages his long-term physical and mental health. It's a trap with no easy way out.
And this all seems to connect to the work of Byung-Chul Han and his book, The Burnout Society. We've touched on him before, but his diagnosis of modern culture feels so relevant here.
It's incredibly relevant. Han's argument is that we've moved from a disciplinary society where we were controlled by don't to an achievement society where we are driven by pan. Yes, I can do more. Yes, I can be more productive.
An ideology of excessive positivity.
Yes. We're expected to be constantly available, constantly processing information, constantly performing and optimizing ourselves. It's a society of hyperattention and hyperactivity.
So in that context, silence is more than just a boardroom tactic. It's a form of rebellion.
It's a profound act of countercultural resistance. In a world that demands you constantly react, post, and engage, choosing silence is a refusal to participate in the pathology. Han talks about how we're losing the contemplative life because we're too busy being active. Elias's silence wasn't just about managing his status, it was about protecting his own mind from the fragmenting chaos of the room.
He was preserving his ability to actually think clearly instead of just reacting.
He was opting out of the burnout cycle in real time, which is an incredibly powerful idea. It's not just about looking tough, it's a strategy for mental and spiritual survival.
Wow. And if that's how these dynamics play out in a professional setting, things get even more complicated, and I'd say even more raw. when we shift the context to the dating market.
Yes, this is where the biology gets even more front and center, and it can be uncomfortable territory.
It can. We have a second story here about a man named Marcus who applies this quiet professional ethos not to his career, but to his romantic life.
Let's hear it.
Imagine a man named Marcus living in the heart of a hyper-connected metropolis where social capital is often measured by how much noise you can make. I read a profile of him where he describes his transition from being the life of the party, constantly seeking external validation through flashy displays of status, to someone who prioritized internal peace. In the sexual marketplace, as the biological theorists put it, he stopped performing. He stopped engaging in the loud, high-conflict games of pursuit and posturing. Instead, he spent his weekends solo hiking or reading, becoming almost invisible to the digital crowd. When he eventually met his partner, it wasn't because of a curated persona, but because of his lack of one. He had reached the point where his self-worth was no longer a commodity for trade. Looking at Marcus's journey, it's easy to see how this fits into the narrative of the quiet professional. There's a biological logic to it. High-status individuals don't need to shout to be heard. However, I've seen some people interpret this as a form of cold detachment or a way to game attraction. From my perspective, I think it's actually much more human than that. It's the result of the disappointment and disillusionment mentioned in our framework. Marcus didn't become quiet to be alpha. He became quiet because he finally accepted his own imperfections and stopped asking the world to fix them for him. It's a move from showing to being, and while it looks like a strategy, it feels like a relief.
A move from showing to being. That is such a crucial distinction.
It sounds profound, but let's ground it in the data we have. The source material from Alpha Mastery talks about sexual market value curves, or SMV. Now, I know this language can be jarring. It sounds like you're talking about people like assets on the stock market.
It's very clinical, and we should be clear that we're reporting on a theoretical framework here. But the evolutionary argument behind it is that, on average, men's and women's value in the mating market follows different trajectories over time. The curves are asynchronous.
Meaning they don't peak at the same time.
Not at all. The theory suggests the female curve peaks relatively early, often in the early to mid-20s, and this is tied directly to evolutionary markers of peak fertility in youth. Biology can be, pretty brutal and straightforward in that sense.
In the male curve?
The male curve is a slow, steady climb. It often doesn't start to really accelerate until the late 20s and may not peak until the late 30s or even early 40s.
Why the delay?
Because the things that signal male value from an evolutionary perspective, things like competence, status, emotional stability, the ability to acquire and protect resources, they all take time, a lot of time. You can't be born with them. You have to spend decades building them.
So 21-year-old guy, even if he's physically in his prime, is still at a low point on this particular curve.
In this framework, yes. He generally has no proven competence, no real resources, no established status. So what does he do to compensate? He makes noise. He performs.
This is the peacocking we see in young men. The loud cars, the flashy clothes, constantly posting achievements on social media.
It's all an attempt to simulate the value that he doesn't actually possess yet. He's shouting, "Look at me, I'm important," because he's deeply insecure that no one will notice him otherwise. It's a low-value signal precisely because it's so effortful. True, established status doesn't need to advertise.
Which brings us to this idea in the source material of the magic of 30. What happens around that age?
That's described as the great intersection. It's the point where, on average, the ascending male curve starts to cross the descending female curve. And this, according to the research, can create a lot of, let's call it, cognitive emotional dissonance, particularly for highly successful women in their 30s.
What kind of dissonance?
Well, think about a woman who is, say, 34. She might be at the absolute peak of her career. She's smart, successful, powerful. Her social and professional value has never been higher, but she may find that in the sexual marketplace, she doesn't command the same kind of attention or leverage she had at 24.
Because the kind of men she's now interested in, the high-status, competent, emotionally stable men, aren't necessarily prioritizing a partner with an equally impressive resume.
They often aren't looking for another competitor. They're looking for a partner. They're looking for peace, for vitality, for a respite from the competitive world they battle in all day. This leads to the concept of green corridors.
Okay, what are green corridors?
They're zones of equal transaction value. It's where the different values on the curves align to create a stable psychological and evolutionary partnership.
The source gives a few examples.
Yeah, and they're provocative. For instance, the elite corridor. A high-value 45-year-old man, successful, stable, in shape, and a woman in her early 20s. Society might call him a cliché, but from its biological perspective, it's a perfect value exchange. He offers maximum resources and protection. She offers peak fertility signals.
Or the example of a 30-year-old woman and a 50 or 55-year-old man, assuming he's also high status.
Right. The point is that the value exchange isn't symmetrical by age. And Marcus, our quiet hiker, fits into this because he opted out of the young man's game. He stopped trying to compete by making noise.
He stopped showing and started being.
Exactly. As he got older and actually built the competence and internal stability, he realized the sales pitch was no longer necessary. His value became self-evident, so he could afford to be quiet.
This reminds me of the Reddit discussion that was in the source material about Tony Soprano. It's a funny example, but it's strangely perfect. Why is a character like Tony Soprano, a violent criminal, so attractive to so many?
The Tony Soprano factor. It's a brilliant case study. It is not about the violence or the crime. It's about the projection of raw, undeniable competence. It's about gravitas.
The ultimate protector role.
He is a shield between his family and a chaotic, dangerous world. He absorbs the chaos. But look at how he interacts, especially with Dr. Melfi, a woman he respects. He doesn't brag. He doesn't try to impress her.
He mostly just listens. He sits there heavily. He lets her talk.
Because he's secure. He knows he's the boss. He doesn't need to remind anyone. That's what the source means when it calls bragging a beta trait. It's an attempt to convince someone of your value. Silence and calm listening is an alpha trait because it assumes your value is already understood.
So when Marcus quit the dating apps and started going hiking alone, it wasn't an act of surrender. It was a high-level filtering strategy.
It was. It signaled that he was self-contained, that his happiness wasn't contingent on external validation. And in a world of digital noise and what the source calls the perception paradox, where everyone is performing and overvaluing themselves online, that kind of quiet, grounded reality is incredibly magnetic.
Which brings us to our third and final story. We've talked about the high-stakes boardroom and the complex dating market, but what about just surviving daily life? Living in your apartment building. This is the story of Julian, and it feels less about status and more about basic sanity.
It's where the rubber really meets the road for most of us.
Yeah, exactly. So here's the story. I was browsing a community forum and came across a thread about Julian, a man navigating a particularly atomized life in a high-conflict apartment complex. He was caught in the middle of a toxic dispute between neighbors that had turned into a digital smear campaign on the building's private group. Instead of leaking his own frustration or joining a side to secure his own social safety, Julian practiced what he called radical transparency with himself. He stayed silent in the group chats and remained polite in the hallways, even when provoked. He treated the conflict as a weather pattern, something to be observed and prepared for, but not something to be controlled or argued with. He understood that in a society where everyone is isolated and on edge, maturity is the ultimate survival mechanism to avoid being sucked into the vacuum of other people's emotional turbulence. The story struck me because it highlights the deconstruction of maturity as a tool for modern survival. In a world that feels increasingly fractured, Julian's choice to maintain his boundaries and ignore the leakage of others is almost a political act.
Maturity is a political act. I love that framing. It's so powerful.
It takes it out of the realm of just, being a good person and turns it into a strategy.
A survival strategy. And it brings us right back to Byung-Chul Han's idea of social atomization. We live in these little boxes, our apartments, our curated digital feeds. We're physically alone, but we're surrounded by noise.
And we're desperate for connection, so we lash out just to feel something, just to feel seen.
Right, because negative attention is still attention. And this creates the perfect conditions for what one of our sources, Wikipedia of all things, defines as graphomania.
The obsession with writing and being published.
But in this context, it's more of a specific subset called grapheria.
Which sounds unpleasant.
It is. It's a meaningless, compulsive succession of words. It's the digital diarrhea of the modern age. The long, angry, rambling posts in the building's group chat. The endless accusations and self-justifications.
It's an attempt to control the world through text.
A futile attempt. And Julian's genius is that he simply refuses to participate. By staying silent, he is rejecting the entire premise of the conflict. He is treating their drama like bad weather. You don't stand outside and scream at a hurricane.
You close the windows and wait for it to pass.
Right. And this connects to the source on the politics of maturity. The argument there is that maturity isn't just a personal virtue, it's a form of governance.
How so?
You have to think of your own life, your mind, your home, your family, as a small, sovereign nation. You are its leader. Your number one job is to protect its borders and maintain internal peace and order.
So every time you let the neighbor's drama ruin your evening, you're failing as a governor. You've allowed a foreign invasion.
You've allowed your border to be breached. Julian's silence isn't passive. It's not being nice. It's strict militant border control. He is protecting his own sovereignty.
There's a piece of pasted text in the notes that I think just encapsulates this perfectly. Maturity arrives slowly. It grows through silences that taught you more than words ever could. You begin to see people for who they are, fighting a battle you may never see.
And that right there is the fundamental shift. It's the move from judgment to observation. When you engage in the fight, you are judging. You're saying you are wrong and I am right and I must prove it.
But when you step back into silence,
you're just observing. You're realizing this person's behavior isn't about me. This person is in pain, or this person is disordered, or they're just caught in their own chaos. But that is their battle, not mine.
it's exactly what my friend said at the very beginning. I don't need an explanation anymore. I finally just understood.
That's it. That's the internal clarity. That is true closure. We're taught to believe that closure is something we get from other people, an apology, an explanation. But real closure is an inside job. It's the moment you realize you don't need anything from them to be okay.
But the source makes an important distinction here between being healed and just being cold. What's the difference? How do you practice this without just becoming a detached, unfeeling person?
It's a crucial distinction. A cold person is numb. They've shut down their emotional system, often as a response to trauma. They don't feel the anger or the hurt anymore. A healed person, like we hope Julian is, still feels it. He probably gets annoyed. He probably feels his blood pressure rise when he sees another angry post.
He doesn't have to act on it.
The feeling no longer controls his behavior. He can feel the emotion without letting it dictate his actions. He has separated stimulus from response. And that right there is the definition of psychological freedom.
So if we just take a step back and look at these three stories together, Elias in the boardroom, Marcus on the dating scene, Julian in his apartment building, they are in completely different arenas of life.
But they are all deploying the exact same technology.
The technology of silence. Elias uses it to signal biological and professional competence. My nervous system is stronger than yours.
Marcus uses it to signal sexual market value. My self-worth is internal. I don't need your validation.
And Julian uses it as a political tool for survival. Your chaos is not welcome in my sovereign state.
And in every single case, the silence is more powerful than the noise. That is the core takeaway for anyone listening. We live in an attention economy, and everyone is screaming for a piece of it. Noise is the default. It's cheap, it's easy, it's everywhere.
Which, by definition, makes silence the ultimate luxury good.
It has become the rarest, most valuable commodity we have. And because it's so rare and so difficult to maintain, it has become the most potent signal of all. It signals that you possess the one resource that's almost extinct: self-control.
It completely flips that old saying, don't just sit there, do something. It suggests that sometimes just sitting there, calmly, quietly, is the most powerful and aggressive move you can possibly make.
So maybe the question you should ask yourself next time you feel baited into an argument isn't, how can I win this?
But am I strong enough not to play at all?
That's where we'll leave you.